from where I sit is so fake. I mean, it really is irking me because what you're acting like is so fake, macho nonsense.
The whole house smelled like sex, Your Honor.
Oh, subconsciously I was trying to seduce him. I was wearing inappropriate things around him. That was really stupid of me at the time.
What are you two today?
We're everything.
Oh, I see that.
That's right.
I don't even speak to these two, number one.
No, we don't
For
speak
saying,
to you.
okay. They don't speak to
Ms. Kavanaugh is in court today with her mother, and all they want to do is prove the paternity of Ms. Kavanaugh's 3-week-old son, Malcolm. The women claim that Mr. Bowles here is the father of Malcolm, however. Ms. Kavanaugh admits that another man she had intercourse with during the conception period could be Malcolm's father. That man, Mr. McElliott, is also in court today.
Is Malcolm's father?
Your Honor, I believe Mr. Bowles is my son's father. Even though we wasn't in a committed relationship, we had unprotected sex frequently, and he has not been around. He doesn't ask about my son. He probably didn't even know my son's name was Malcolm until now. And I'm just ready to prove that he is the father.
You know you've messed up massively when you have a baby with a man perfectly willing not to find out the name of a child that's potentially his. Even if Malcolm turns out not to be Mr. Bowles' son, the fact that he probably doesn't even know the child's name is horrible. How is Mr. Bowles even so sure that he's not the baby daddy? What makes him so certain?
How can you be so sure that you're not?
That's because when we first met the first night, we had sex within like 20 minutes of being in her house.
It wasn't within 20 minutes.
And then, like probably 3 weeks later, maybe 2 weeks later, I found like an open condom wrapper in her bathroom.
Well,
She had already said that
just because
like, I was the only person she was having sex with. And so then I found
just
the wrapper.
because I had sex with him on the first night doesn't mean I have sex with everybody.
Even if you had intercourse with someone just 20 minutes after meeting them, it doesn't mean they can't give you a kid. It doesn't seem like Mr. Bowles knows that. And Ms. Kavanaugh insists that the opened condom wrapper wasn't actually for her, but for her friend and her boyfriend who spent the night. Now, Mr. Bowles says that Ms. Kavanaugh told him at the time that she'd used the condoms with her ex.
Yes.
When you find out, who do you tell?
Your Honor, I told him. I told Mr. Bowles because that's who I believed was the father. It was the right date, right conception time. But I did have one sexual encounter with Mr. McElliott, and it was only because I wanted to be in a serious relationship with Mr. Bowles. And I felt like he didn't respect me and didn't care about my feelings. So yes, I did have one encounter.
If someone doesn't like you and you want to be in a serious relationship with them, the worst thing you can probably do to solve that problem is to get with someone else to make them jealous. If you do it enough times, you'll find yourself in paternity court. But that's not the only shameless thing Mrs. Kavanaugh did.
Oh, fully.
And also before she got pregnant, she actually lied about being pregnant maybe like some weeks before. She lied about it.
That is true. The way that I found out that I was truly pregnant with my son is because I was very childish when I was talking to Mr. Bowles. Like, I really cared about him, and I desperately wanted him to care about me because we were with each other basically.
That's another thing you shouldn't do to make someone like you. No one is going to get inspired to get into a loving relationship with you just because you got pregnant for them. At best, they'll pay child support and be there for the child. But that doesn't mean they'll be there for you. Unfortunately, Ms. Kavanaugh never got that memo.
So you had a plan to pretend you were pregnant in order to keep him. And then what happened?
Well, I took both of the tests, Your Honor, and I went to go eat, and I came back and they were both positive.
And that's how Ms. Kavanaugh found out she was pregnant for real. She wanted a baby to trap Mr. Bowles in a relationship with, and she'd gotten her baby. The only problem she had was trapping Mr. Bowles.
Like, when I was pretending to be pregnant or trying to be pregnant, I don't think I understand fully the responsibility that I do now.
Yes.
So,
because it's a lot of responsibility,
yes,
isn't it?
It's hard.
And I'm very proud of her. She's really stepped up.
We've heard a lot from Mr. Bowles and Ms. Kavanaugh. It's time for us to hear from the other potential father, Mr. McElliott. He probably has something interesting to say.
My relationship with Ms. Kavanaugh, I would say, is a very special one. Me and her, we met, I got her number, I called her that evening and offered her for a movie. We hooked up and went out to eat or something like that. But ever since.
So you took her on dates and courted her and treated her like a lady should be treated?
Always.
So on one hand, we have Mr. McElliott, who says he wants to be the father of Malcolm because he wants to be with Miss Kavanaugh. And on the other hand, we have Mr. Bowles, who says he hopes he isn't the father and never wants to see Mrs. Kavanaugh again. Hopefully one of them turns out to be the father, and we can bring this chapter to a close. Let's see what the DNA results have to say about that. The first result we have is for Mr. McElliott.
Mr. McElliott, you are not his father.
You can see that this hurts Mr. McElliott. Of course, this means that Macomb has to belong to Mr. Bowles, right?
Mr. Bowles, you are not his father.
I'm sorry.
Calm down.
Right? So who is the father of Ms. Kavanaugh's child, Malcolm? Well, to get answers to that question, we actually have to check out another appearance of Ms. Kavanaugh on paternity court. Ms. Kavanaugh is in court again to find out who the father of her child, Malcolm, is. This time, she brings along with her a good friend of her mother, the defendant, Mr. Spence. Mr. Spence here says he had intercourse with Mrs. Kavanaugh once after repeated attempts from her to sleep with him. And now he says there's a good chance he could be Malcolm's father.
Your mother's friend?
Yes, Your Honor. I know how bad it sounds. It is bad. I started calling him up, asking for like rides, to the grocery store, to get stuff from my house. And subconsciously, I was trying to try to seduce him. I was wearing inappropriate things around him.
And why were you doing this?
In all honesty, I was drinking a lot. And I don't know if I did it for a challenge.
At least Kavanaugh is smart enough to know how badly she messed up to be in this predicament. Mr. Spence says he is just a friend of Miss Kavanaugh's mother. So this isn't a case where Mr. Spence was sleeping with them at the same time.
It was like she said, came over a couple of times. She was in inappropriate gear. The first time, I shunned it off. Second time, I said, hey, watch yourself. Third time, it's starting to look good.
And the third time's the charm, isn't it? The fourth time, there was a lapse in judgment, and now Mr. Spence could be Malcolm's father. Interestingly, Mr. Spence says he was intimate with Ms. Kavanaugh just once. So if he really is the father of the child, then that's really amazing. But Ms. Kavanaugh disagrees.
Time, Ms. Kavanaugh?
Your Honor, I do not believe it to be once. It was at least twice. But that's just how
Ms. Kavanaugh says she thinks Malcolm looks a little bit like Mr. Spence, but she's unwilling to make a judgment on his paternity with that. That's really smart, Ms. Kavanaugh. But what it also means is that there is at least one other possibility that Ms. Kavanaugh isn't telling us about. If the two other men she tested weren't Malcolm's fathers, then Mr. Spence has to be. Unless there were other men in the mix. And now, that would be extraordinarily irresponsible. It's insane to have up to 4 potential fathers for your child.
It's like, I thought Mr. Bowles was the dad. Well, after the court, I started thinking, well, he could be a possibility that Mr. Spence is the father. And I texted him, and I asked him, when was the last time we had sex? He told me it was the end of October.
And when was Malcolm born?
So when you do the maths, it's a real possibility that Mr. Spence is Malcolm's father. Mr. Spence's friend and Miss Kavanaugh's mother, Mitchell Kavanaugh, is in court today to say her piece as well. One can only wonder how she felt to know that her very good friend slept with her daughter.
Good friend.
It was very devastating, just because the relationship was inappropriate. I felt betrayed.
Well, anyone would feel betrayed too to learn their friend was having that sort of fun with their child. Interestingly, Ms. Kavanaugh says she questioned her daughter and Mr. Spence because she noticed some chemistry between them, and they both denied that anything happened. Now, Ms. Kavanaugh, the one who seduced Mr. Spence, says she cannot take all the blame for what happened between them.
I do admit that I did come on to him, and it was probably really a strong come on.
You did admit that in
he
court.
But he is a grown man. He could have told me no.
Well, Mr. Spence could have told her no. But he isn't the one with the baby, and he isn't the one who's been on paternity court twice. So maybe he could have said no. But the consequences of such irresponsible and shameless behavior are always majorly borne by the woman in these situations. So she should probably be more careful. But Mr. Spence isn't totally off the hook either.
So,
Mr. Spence, let me ask you this. Are you in a relationship?
I'm married.
Okay. Now I do understand why you're hoping he's not your child.
That's not what I'm hoping.
What are you hoping?
I hope for...
Well, Mr. Spence, if you hope for the truth, then the truth is what we are going to get. However, Ms. Spence's truth doesn't look very good for Mrs. Kavanaugh, because it seems there were other people, other than Mr. Bowles and Mr. McElliott, who were involved with Miss Kavanaugh during the time Malcolm was conceived.
Oh, so she told you?
Yes.
What did she say?
I'm sleeping with other people. I got a boyfriend.
Oh.
Which was Mr. Bowles at the time, Your Honor.
Understood.
Yeah.
But we also know that there was Mr. Scott, too.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yeah,
He's been tested and
So there are now two potential fathers, Mr. Spence and another man, Mr. Scott.
we understand that you had a sexual relationship with Miss Kavanaugh.
Yes, ma'am.
And it was during the window of conception. Do you agree with that?
Yes, ma'am.
You were not using protection?
I use protection every time. I don't recall, not using protection.
So you don't recall. Now, she says there was an instance when you did not, right?
Yes, Your Honor.
And you say there was no instance?
No, ma'am. I strongly, I don't believe that, Malcolm is mine.
Hopefully, these are the last two possibilities. Hopefully, Malcolm's father is in this courtroom today, and this can just be the end of this episode.
So these are the last two possibilities, Miss Kavanaugh?
There's one more, Your Honor.
Well, Ms. Kavanaugh, there's nothing more that can be said about you. All we can do now is hope and pray that one of these men is your baby daddy. Let's see what the DNA test results have to say about that.
Mr. Scott, you are not his father.
Okay, that was a bust. Hopefully the next one won't be. Hopefully Mr. Spence will be the father.
Mr. Spence, you are not his father.
Ms. Seaton is in court today because she believes her mother committed paternity fraud and lied to her about the identity of her father. She was raised believing one man is her father, but she now knows that another man is her dad. Ms. McPeak says this is a lie and that her ex-husband is her daughter's father, not Mr. Bryson, the man Ms. Seaton thinks is her real father.
Well, Your Honor, I just want to start by saying I haven't seen her talk to this woman in 5 years, almost 5 years. The reason that I haven't seen her talk to her in almost 5 years is because she's a liar. I was raised to think that a man named Jesse Seaton was my biological father. He signed my birth certificate, he cut my umbilical cord, and he was awesome. I have since found out that there was another possibility that Mr. Bryson could be my father.
That's a very candid and straightforward testimony from Ms. Seaton. Ms. McPeak also has choice words for her daughter.
My daughter doesn't care who she hurts at all. She's a very cold-hearted person, and she just does not care who she hurts.
Have you lied to her about her father?
No. They could have had DNA when I had her, but Jesse and them all didn't want DNA. So evidently he must have thought he was the father because he didn't want no DNA.
Well, maybe, but that cannot be the reason Jesse Seaton is her father, right? You can't say someone is another person's father just because they didn't dispute it. Yes, fathers don't dispute the paternity of their kids, but that lack of dispute isn't the reason they are their kids' fathers. Right off the bat, it looks like Ms. McPeak is hiding something here. You know what? There's probably a good reason why mother and daughter haven't seen or spoken in 5 years.
Back in 2011, I had complications and I needed a blood transfusion. My mom was supposed to make it to the hospital. She never showed up, whatever the reason was. So my grandmother and my Uncle Paul had both donated blood for the blood transfusion, and it came out that they were not, either one of them wasn't a match. So
it wasn't like Ms. Seaton went out looking for the truth about her identity. It just landed in her lap. However, Ms. McPeak disputes this in the strangest of ways.
She's a liar. She always has been. She does whatever she can to hurt anybody. She doesn't have a heart at all.
But is she lying about the hospital saying there's not a match?
Yes, she is. Liar.
Your Honor, I would just like to say my grandmother did submit a statement if you would like to.
Calling someone a liar doesn't make an argument. And the evidence Ms. Seaton submits checks out. The issue of the blood at the hospital is true. And Ms. Seston's grandmother's letters say that when Ms. McPeak started going out with Jesse Seaton, she was already pregnant by Mr. Bryson. What does McPeak say to that? Well, it's more insults from her.
She's never liked me. She's just as big a liar as her granddaughter. Plain and simple. She never thought that I was good enough for her son. He could have had DNA at that time, and he didn't want DNA. He said he was 100% sure it was his. And ever since Jessica's been old enough to talk, maybe kindergarten, she's been nothing but an habitual liar.
You know what would be the strangest and the most shameful thing? If the DNA results come out and show that Mr. Bryson is actually Ms. Seston's father. One wonders what Ms. McPeak would do then.
Mom, however, had told me on more than one occasion that she had DNA done between me and Mr. Seaton. She also told my grandmother, Karen, and when asked about the results, I contacted our local DNA centers and did some research.
Mr. Bryson says that Ms. McPeak had told him the same thing. But Ms. McPeak says that's a lie, and everyone is lying against her. Let's see what Mr. Greg Bryson has to say about this.
Do you believe you are Miss Seaton's, Jessica's biological father?
Yes, I guarantee you, Your Honor.
You do?
Oh, yes.
Why do you believe that?
Look at her. She looks like my other daughter. I guarantee you, the money I got in my pocket, she's mine. Secondly, the grandmother, Jesse's mother, told me she's between the ages of 6 and 10, that she knew that that was my daughter, not her son.
But that's not all. Mr. Bryson has even more damning accusations for Ms. McPeak. He says she'd come over to him and told him straight to his face that the child she was carrying belonged to him and not to Jesse Seaton.
You were the only one she was having?
Oh, no, Your Honor. There were several other men she had been with. I found this out later on. But, you know, it's,
How many men did you find out she was with?
4. Wow. But, you know, it's the kind of thing, without being rude to anybody, and anybody taking anything offensively, there are those people that need multiple men for multiple things. This young lady was one of them.
Phew! That's a lot to unpack. Let's see if Mr. Bryson is really telling the truth about the paternity of Miss Seaton. And let's see if Ms. McPeak is the biggest liar in the courtroom or the biggest victim. It's time for the DNA test results. To determine paternity, 2 tests were performed. One was a DNA test between Ms. Seaton and her uncle, Jesse Seaton's brother, and one between Ms. Seaton and Mr. Bryson.
It has been determined by this court. The biological father is Mr. Bryson.
Thank you.
Where was you all your life?
You lie. I never once.
Okay. Just hug your daughter.
Okay.
Yeah, Arthur Ellis and Eugene Ellis have brought their mother to court today to learn who their real father is. That's because they recently learned that their mother, Ms. Shivers, slept with both their father and his brother. So their uncle could actually be their biological father. Ms. Shivers admits she did this and is in court today to find out who fathered her boys and beg for their forgiveness. Phew!
We were at a family gathering, you know, just having some drinks or whatever, and Uncle Ronnie came up to me and said, "You know, I'm your son. You know, you my son, right? You know, so."
Yeah, it was basically like a family get together. It was a family function. You know how people get when they,
indulge or whatnot. I guess he overindulged and the truth came to light, so he approached my brother.
It's not the truth.
Well,
believe whatever you want to believe.
okay, we're leaving the door open. Believe what you want to believe.
It up.
Assume what you want to assume.
Yeah.
He assumes Ronnie's.
Ms. Shivers admits that she slept with both brothers because she had no choice and nowhere to go. Now, one of her sons, Arthur Ellis, believes he is his uncle's son, and the other son, Eugene, says it's possible because their father treated Arthur differently while he was alive.
He didn't even write me that much when I was in jail, but he wrote him, send him money, so that made me feel some type of way as well, Unfortunately, we had to take a trip down the road, and my father, he wrote me more than he did my brother, you know what I'm saying? And you don't do that if that's your child, you're supposed to be there through thick and thin like my mom, I heard from her every day of, that place or that situation, but when we were in that situation, he didn't reach out to my brother at all, not really at all.
That's really cold. And it's true, Arthur Ellis deserves to know the truth. On the flip side, the man who could be Arthur's father, Ronnie Ellis, has always shown him more love than his actual supposed father. Eugene Ellis, on the other hand, is sure of his paternity.
Look at me, and you look at my dad. If you had a full body shot of my dad, I'm slim like my dad. I'm built like my dad. My features like my dad. Arthur is big. He's a big guy right here. Uncle Ronnie is big. That's a big guy right there. They broad. I'm skinny. I'm slim.
Well,
his hair is different from my hair. If we got the same dad, okay, wouldn't you think that his texture of his hair would come out the same as mine? Because I got.
Yeah, Eugene might be sure of who his father is, but his mother isn't that sure. She has reasonable and credible doubts about who Eugene's real father is. And Eugene is finding this out in real time right in paternity court.
Well, Your Honor, I was married to another man before I left and went to Detroit, and that's when I got pregnant with Eugene, so.
Do you feel there are reasonable, credible doubts as it relates to Eugene as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
That's insane. Hopefully this testimony from Ronnie McClellan can clear all of this up and paint a clearer picture of the paternity of the Ellis brothers.
This young man could be your biological child.
My brother had put her and Eugene out, and they came back to Chicago and lived with me. And while they were living with me, she said we only had sex once. She must have meant we only had sex once sober. You hear me? That's what she must have meant, Because she can't even remember the first time,
But you remember.
Oh, boy. Really?
No more details needed.
Okay, so the potential father is between Ronnie McClellan and the now departed John Ellis. Hopefully there is no other potential father for Arthur Ellis.
Ask you this respectfully, are there any other possible fathers?
Yes, Your Honor. Cool Breeze. I met him when I was waitressing in the restaurant, and he ran a big hotel. And he also, gave me jobs and stuff. That's when Eugene was like about 4 or 5. We had a couple of little nights, where we had a few drinks and we did have intimacy. He died, it might be a possibility because when I was staying at Mama Mildred's with Ronnie.
And there we have it, folks. 3 potential fathers for Arthur Ellis and 2 potential fathers for Eugene Ellis. We are going to check the results for Eugene first.
John Ellis is your biological father. It has been determined by this court, John Ellis is your father.
I knew that. I said that from the beginning. I knew that. Look at me.
Now let's check the results for Arthur and see whether Ronnie, John Ellis, or perhaps even this fellow Cool Breeze might be his potential father.
Pertaining to whether John Ellis or his brother Ronald McClellan is your biological father, it has been determined by this court. John Ellis is your father.